Well, it happened. We talked on Friday how the Cyberpunk 2077 source code had finally leaked. Back in February, CDPR themselves were hacked. Source codes for several games were taken, with Cyberpunk 2077 source code being probably one of the most notable. On Friday, the source code was posted online, except the files were all password protected, with the password supposedly coming in an auction for charity in the ensuing days. And put simply, now it seems like users do have full-on open access to this source code, and some very interesting things have been coming out as a result of this, as we've had several almost montages of bugs from Cyberpunk 2077 that were created by CDPR employees themselves, found and posted online. We could see old versions of the game from 2013 and even some more damning stuff that could end up getting CDPR in trouble. In this video, I want to recap what is leaked thus far and what we could actually expect on the horizon, as I imagine there's going to be quite a bit of additional news around this game in the next week or so. So first and foremost, let's look at some of this new footage going around. About 20 minutes of footage in total has leaked, the vast majority of which are actual videos of bugs in Cyberpunk in kind of a meme fashion. One of the main videos is actually titled Cyber El Bugado 2020. It seems like this was actually created shortly before the release of the game, although the actual clips in it are from all different time frames, some several years old. In effect, what these videos are showcasing are a ton of bugs found all throughout Cyberpunk 2077. Some of the stuff is just of character model glitches, some physics glitches, a ton of chickens for some reason are found in this. I'm guessing the chickens were some kind of inside joke at CDPR directly just to how many images and clips of chickens are featured here. And for some of the clips, it's very clearly just developers messing around, but some other ones do seem more blatant, actually highlighting bugs that were encountered in the game. Some of these encountered during development and later fixed, some other ones seemingly weren't fixed. The thing is with this video is it is structured almost like a Crowcat video, if you've seen that, or a gamer poop video. Like on the Cyber El Bugado 2020 video, it literally starts off with it saying releasing when it's ready. One of those big quotes from CD Projekt that obviously didn't age super well. And then just a montage of all kinds of insane bugs in the game, many times actually synced to various music that makes it quite a bit funnier. And it's not even just gameplay. Some of the bugs were actually turned into memes by the developers themselves. This isn't user created, this is actually made by a CDPR employee. So naturally, you could probably see how this could blow up very quickly. A video like this in general, if it was made by the community, would get millions of views, but the fact that it was made by CDPR themselves, seemingly right around release in 2020, and then ended up leaking to the public, it of course is pretty big and pretty funny news when you consider the state by which the game released in. And honestly, in its own right, videos like this aren't even all that odd. Other companies have shared similar things. It seems fairly common in game development to make these little montages because it is funny. A lot of these are older clips that were probably just found or shared internally while they were making the game. So the video in its own right, again, isn't that crazy, but things are a bit more concerning when you could see some of the bugs showcased here did literally ship with the game. And we have that fairly famous CEO quote now, where after the disastrous release of Cyberpunk, it was stated how several of the bugs that were showing up for users were not found during development and thus kind of weren't fixed during development, or at least that's what it seemed like was implied by that statement, which this seems to be quite the contrast to that when you're seeing many of these bugs literally in an internal montage that seems to be dated before the game's release. So overall with this one, I would say it's more funny than frustrating. The videos are leaked online in entirety. I would check them out because it is just kind of entertaining. A lot of this stuff has been fixed, some of it hasn't been fixed yet, and just from a video perspective, it's very well put together and quite entertaining as far as the music, syncing, and all of that does tie in. I've seen some people saying that all of these are bugs that weren't fixed, and it was actually developers highlighting all of the bugs that weren't fixed before the game shipping, but that doesn't really seem to be the case at all, especially when you look at some of these clips being very old. Like one of the clips is literally from the 2013 build of the game. It's a montage of bugs, but several of them were already fixed, and I think it's just a funny montage, not really a serious warning to the managers or anything like that. Speaking of which, there's also a fairly lengthy video of the 2013 build of Cyberpunk here. If you don't know, development on this game seemed to start around 2012, but it seems like this was much more a proof of concept than anything else. We could see the gameplay here that looks very dated. It is in third person. It almost looks like a Mass Effect cross with The Witcher 3. This is of course before The Witcher 3 released. Then following the release of The Witcher 3 in 2016, Cyberpunk 2077 was going to really start development. So most of this 2013 build was scrapped. We've heard that from interviews, but it still is interesting to see what was. Several of the things that were already here are the mention of things like Max Tack, the character being named V. You hear the name Sandra mentioned, although a lot of that could be from Cyberpunk 2020. And even during all of this, you could see some stuff that were highly requested but didn't end up making it into the final game. Some of the vehicles shown during this never actually made it into the game. It looks like they were cut for one reason or another. The third person in that 2013 build, of course, didn't make it into the final game. A lot of people still pretty salty about that one. And even one of the funniest of the bunch, you could actually see a more zoomed out minimap. Cyberpunk 2077 has this big problem where when you're driving, the minimap's so zoomed in, a lot of times you'll just blow past your turn, and it's been a frustration for a while. But what you notice is, even though this has that more zoomed out minimap, towards the end of this clip, it actually starts glitching out and gets all buggy. This is the exact same problem that you run into if you use zoomed out minimap mods. It's a super common problem with those mods. So I'm guessing the reason CDPR has yet to implement a more zoomed out minimap, despite it being a day one request, is they just haven't gotten it working yet, as clearly they had the idea during development and they couldn't get it working properly. Although for the vast majority of this, I honestly think it's pretty interesting, and it might be pretty embarrassing for CDPR or some of the developers. It's not all that harmful directly. It's not like this is a ton of sensitive information being released. Although one of the things that could end up being a bigger problem is a line found in the source code of the game. On a list of censors around Cyberpunk 2077, the censor name for China is labeled as Censor Winnie the Pooh. So this could end up actually being a pretty big problem. I'm not going to get into exactly the history of the Chinese government and Winnie the Pooh, but let's just leave it at Winnie the Pooh is banned in China. This is quite clearly making fun of that ban with the censored naming, and the Chinese government has gotten angry at less and actually banned companies from their country for less. CD Projekt Red does operate in China. The GOG store is open there. In the past, we saw a controversial move by them removing the game Devotion after they said they weren't going to remove it, because apparently a ton of gamers reached out requesting that it be removed from the store or was offensive. Game Devotion being super controversial in China, and it's another story I don't want to get into, but clearly they were interested in appeasing the Chinese government with that move. So it'll be interesting to see if this whole Winnie the Pooh censor ends up being something or nothing. It's so niche and kind of specific, just a leaked part of the source code, that I could see the story not blowing up and leading anywhere. But there's already been a ton of discussion about this, and again, the Chinese government has banned companies for less. So if this does lead to a ban, that could be a pretty big move. But overall, it seems like more and more is just going to come out from these leaks. It's really only been a little over 24 hours thus far. And of course, as people dig further into these files, more stuff is going to come out, perhaps even over what DLC we could expect from this game and data mines around that. Although, at the very least, things do seem to be looking up somewhat as we approach E3 for CD Projekt Red. Towards the end of May, we talked about how they had a disastrous earnings release and the stock ended up dropping quite significantly, but in June so far, it's actually made a very healthy recovery and has had several positive days with large gains on the stock price. Seems like yet another big patch, maybe just days away now. Definitely keep you guys up to date with that one, doing my testing for the patch and showing you what has changed. It seems like this patch could be slated just before E3, and then likely Cyberpunk 2077 will have a presence at E3 where perhaps we'll get DLC details. Which on that note, we just hit a pretty interesting milestone in that this was right around the time when Blood and Wine was released for The Witcher 3, or at least this many months after release compared to Cyberpunk 2077, which hasn't had anything, even free DLCs, come out yet. Of course, the game actually needing a lot more fixing, the pandemic, etc. all likely contribute to that, but it is just an interesting thing to note. And one of the other things to pop up over the past week or so are several pretty interesting and notable job listings. This around the multiplayer for Cyberpunk 2077. There's a lot of confusion with the multiplayer, people saying and even outlets reporting that it was canceled or scrapped, but that's not really the correct picture. CDPR was planning a big standalone multiplayer release set in the Cyberpunk universe, kind of using Cyberpunk 2077 as a base. That big singular release was scrapped, but instead what we're going to get now are iterative releases of multiplayer. They'll add in some multiplayer features, then build atop that based on feedback, and gradually over time implement it. Some of the job listings that recently popped up are for things like a game programmer, a lead systems designer, and a senior programmer, and these are requesting things like experience with shooters and multiplayer games, extensive knowledge of and hands-on up-to-date experience with current game systems design trends, specifically in online action/RPG area, familiarity with networking and matchmaking, experience with first-person perspective games, especially shooters. And although this is very vague, they're just job listings that recently went up, it does give us a bit of an idea as to what we can expect. It definitely seems more along the lines of matchmaking and maybe a team deathmatch mode of sorts, and not necessarily a full-on co-op mode, which actually does make a lot of sense. I imagine we'll get co-op at some point, but earlier on, perhaps just a multiplayer game mode or two to kind of gradually work our way into it. Either way, a lot has been happening as of late with CD Projekt Red and Cyberpunk, and I think a lot more is coming on the horizon. I'm going to try and have another update on some of the craziest and coolest mods to come out for the game before the next big update, but between the mods, E3, and of course this next big update, there's going to be a lot to talk about, and if you want to stay up to date, you can get subscribed. But otherwise, I thank you all again for watching. I hope you enjoyed this one, and I hope to see you all next time. Later.